Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you are enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you'd like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have 3 tiers of support: the fan level at $3 per month, the supporter level at $7 per month, and the champion level at $20 per month. Benefits of joining the Tennis IQ podcast community include episode transcripts, participation in book club discussions, and access to monthly masterclasses with me and Josh. For more on these benefits of support, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today, Josh and I are going to talk about ways of simplifying your decision-making on the court, and perhaps more specifically, coming up with a set of rules or rules-based decision-making. Part of this was, for me, has come from this thought process of we typically play better when we think less, when we look at things like being in flow, being in the zone. One of the characteristics of that is that we have a quiet mind. Achieving a quiet mind, though, is not as easy as it sounds. It may be just like, well, hey, stop thinking about so many things and so forth. But I think we all know that instead of saying don't do this or stop doing this, we have to actually give you something better to think about. And coming up with some rules or a system of play is one idea of doing that. And we're going to discuss some basic rules that you could apply to your game. And if you were to observe pro players, the majority of them follow these rules, I want to say probably 90% of the time when you're watching them. But I think this idea of helping players simplify their thinking on the court, have less to think about on the court, can only help performance overall. So before we get into the specifics, Josh, just wanted to get your thoughts on the topic itself and, its utility and any other thoughts that you have.
Yeah, I mean, I think players at all levels struggle because they have a lot on their minds. They have a lot of thoughts. They're about to hit a shot and they start thinking about technique. They start thinking about where should I hit this next shot. Especially something like the serve where you're fully in control of that, how that next point starts. It's not like you're responding to something. I think there can be a lot of thoughts going on. It can even turn into paralysis by analysis at some point where you're thinking so much that you're almost, not actually paralyzed, obviously, but you're held back from really performing the action because there's so many thoughts going on. So I think both in terms of a particular shot and broader within a point, there's a lot of decisions to be making. And a lot of thoughts that can be going through players' heads. And I think generally lots of thoughts are going through players' heads. I think that's more the default. So can we start to get to a point where we have a better process of making decisions and simplifying that process so that we don't have to, so that we can clear some space, so that we can clear some space to focus on some other things, so that we're not so wrapped up in, okay, where am I going to go with each shot? Where am I going to serve here? What is my playing style? So that we can answer some of those basic fundamental questions and really stick to that structure that we have determined is effective. And then we're able to focus on other things rather than having that sort of constant stream of thoughts going through our head every time we're about to hit the ball.
And that can be especially problematic in more stressful situations of match, because the score becomes a part of it. Perhaps we're thinking a little bit too much about how we're going to win the point, and then that may end up corrupting our decision making. And I think that's what we're trying to deal with more and more here is how do we make better decisions throughout a match, regardless of the score, regardless of whether you're winning or losing, and then to learn to trust whatever your system or rules are, so that you know what to do in a stressful situation. Because I think that's when I talk to players about first learning how not to lose, it's a lot about creating more discipline around your game and creating more discipline around your between points routine. The between points routine, I think, is pretty easy to have discipline with, Josh, right? Because we have, we're generally teaching a structure, whether that's the 16-second cure or the USTA is somewhat rebranded that. And I'm sure that there are other tennis federations and coaching associations out there that have their versions of what to do between points, but it's relatively structured and players know to go, walk from point A to point B and do this. But in a point, do you have a disciplined way of playing the point? Do you know the basics of directionals? And maybe this is more of an American phenomenon. It could be that players are not as aware of how to use directionals and structure points. Because I don't think I know it's not really taught early on to players. I was recently working a 10 and under green ball camp, and part of the curriculum was how to be an offensive player. And the players are 10 and under. And, my first thought was, well, why are we doing that? Why aren't we doing consistency as a weapon? And I think when we look at tennis players, especially those who have grown up, in Europe or South America, where clay tends to be the more dominant surface for playing, which requires a certain level of patience that maybe those who have grown up in more hardcore-oriented locations may not be developing as much. You have to learn to play a more patient style. You have to learn to play your directionals better. And so what we want to try to do is, I think, share some maybe starter rules, Josh, with people that they could build on. Now, certainly, I think these are rules that would be working for everybody, but you have to customize them for yourself. You may be a more offensive, aggressive player. And, given whatever level you're at, all right, how does that work into some of my decision making, right? So, in terms of the actual directional rules, let's start with like two basic ones. And this also is something, if people are familiar with Thomas Johansson, the Swedish player who won the 2002 Australian Open, he was recently on another tennis podcast, and he was asked for his best advice for the 4-0 player and other club level players. And his advice was basically hit everything cross court. And if you're on the kind of opposite side with your forehand, hit it inside out. And we're going to basically give you the same rules, but maybe phrase it differently. And even though that sounds simple, if you watch most of the top players, they're following this rule. So here's how I would phrase it, Josh, and then I want to get your thoughts on it. So first rule, if you're moving to your right, hit to your left. So let's say you're right-handed and you're moving to your right, you're going to hit the ball to your left. Now that sounds like, yeah, I'm hitting it cross court. In a way, yes. But that doesn't mean it has to land, say, in the deuce side of the other player's court. If I'm in the alley and I'm hitting it to my left, that could still end up in the middle of the court. That's still the right shot. It's going left. So it doesn't have to be all the way to a specific point. And if you watch the pros, if you see the angle of their ball, it's not always going completely cross. It's simply going at an angle, right? They're not hitting, so they're hitting it sort of a less than 90 degree angle, okay? So that's the first rule. You're moving to your right, you hit to your left. The second rule is obviously moving to your left, you hit it to your right. So if you're moving to your left and you're hitting a backhand, again, you're going to angle it back to the right. That could end up in the middle. It could end up in, various parts of the court, but it's going to be at an angle. And if we're talking about our right-handed player and you're moving to your left and you want to hit a forehand, the ball is going to go inside out. That's to the right. Okay. So those are the first two basic rules, very much in agreement with Thomas Johansson. And they're very easy for people to understand. So if you go out onto the court, even if you're rallying with somebody, you could practice these rules and see how that affects your decision making. And I think one thing that I've seen some college coaches do very effectively is when they coach their players, they give them these types of rules to constrain their thinking, which gets them to maybe rebuild their confidence. Again, minimizes what they're having to make decisions about on the court and refine their game. So I just want to stop there, Josh, and get your thoughts on our first two rules.
Yeah, I think the idea of when I'm moving right, hitting the ball left, when I'm moving left, hitting the ball right, are really important because I think that both of them, first of all, are high percentage. So you're hitting over I think it's always important to, when talking to a player, and maybe especially a player who's younger, or especially a player maybe that's getting more into the sport, to describe the why. Why do we hit the ball cross court? And I think at a basic level, there's a couple main reasons. You're hitting over a lower part of the net. So it's, you by hitting the same height shot, you have a greater chance of clearing the ball over the net, which is obviously your one obstacle on the court. And you're hitting into more court. So anyone who can remember Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. If you are hitting cross court, you have more court to hit into. You're hitting into, you're able to hit the ball further, essentially. So again, in terms of consistency, there's a lot of benefits to hitting the ball cross court. But I think, giving yourself those clear rules like that, almost makes it more automatic. Like you were talking about with the 16-second cure, your in-between point routine, making that automatic. It's the same thing here, where if you feel yourself moving to your left, you know that you want to hit the ball right. If you feel yourself moving to the right, you want to hit the ball left. And I think that it just simplifies things. And I think it also gives you a sense of confidence. So you're like, okay, I know where I want to go with this ball, rather than being there and saying, should I do this? Should I do that? I saw Alcaraz hit this unbelievable drop shot. Should I try that? Should I hit the ball super flat as hard as I can? Should I hit it with high, heavy topspin? Nope. I'm sticking to my plan. I'm sticking to my rules. So I think that's really helpful. I just think it's helpful for players to understand why, and even to think through, okay, what, and maybe one person's rules might be slightly different from another's, which is okay. People have different playing styles, but can they talk about what their rules are, and then why have I come up with these rules for myself? Why does this match my game? But why also does this match high percentage tennis? Why does this playing style that I have established for myself, these rules, these patterns that I've established for myself, why do they make sense for my own game? Right? Can you justify them? Can you talk about them in that way? And then I think it's a lot easier to really stick with them when you need them.
Yeah. And one of my objections to the idea of teaching 10 and under players offense was that I think if you're looking at building a player's game, it should start with consistency, like meaning we can get the ball over.
Yep.
Second, directionals. I can hit the ball in certain directions. I want to hit it left, I can hit it left. I want to hit it right, I can hit it right. And then the third piece is accuracy. All right, I want to hit it left, and I would like it to land in this zone over here, right? So teaching offense to players who can't actually do those three things yet doesn't make a lot of sense in my mind. But for whatever, some of them actually can do that to a certain extent. I would say the accuracy maybe is not there. But if you watch the pros, they all have a foundation in those three things. And that's what these rules are about. Your ability to be consistent, your ability to hit the ball in particular directions, and your ability to hit the ball where you would like it to land. Then you can layer on spin and power, and almost add those as adjuncts to what you're doing. So anyone who's listening, what I would say is a couple things. Watch players like Djokovic, Murray, Nadal, and try to ascertain how often they are using these rules. And I think you'll see that they're using it a very high percentage of the time. Now, I would layer on a third rule, Josh, here, especially for our offensive players, and you can watch the pros do this. Rule number 3 would be, if the ball you receive is attackable, meaning you can step into it, or it's short and you can go and be offensive on it, you can change direction. You could go down the line to an open court. You don't have to. You could continue to go cross court, but you have that option now. And that's what you'll see the pros do, is they'll play these first 2 rules on balls that are neutral, and especially defense. Whenever Djokovic is on defense, which he's very, very good at, he's playing these basic rules. When he can step into a ball, that's when he may change direction. So watch those players. The other thing I would say is try this for yourself in a practice match, just to see how it works, just to try to get the experience, because you could be skeptical. Some of the players I've introduced this to have been skeptical, and that's okay. But they have all come back and said, yeah, it worked. And why does it work? It works because most of the people you're playing against don't have any rules. They're going to be unaware of what you're doing. So what will happen is you'll be in a cross-court rally. Your opponent will change direction, probably inappropriately, thus giving you an opportunity to attack the next shot cross-court. Because the cross-court ball will be to the open court because they changed direction. And so you could get away with the first 2 rules by just hitting everything cross-court, and you can still be offensive on that. And again, watch pro tennis, and you will see a lot of guys, even when they're in offensive positions, going cross with that ball, because the other player might be anticipating the ball down the line, etc. So those would be the kind of the first 2 things I would ask listeners to do is, 1, watch some pro tennis. Probably more on the men's side you see this than the women's side. I haven't watched as much of the women's side and try to ascertain how much they're following it, so I can't give you any specific examples of players to do it. But I imagine that a good number of them are. And then just try it for yourself. Just go for the experience and see what you notice. Is it easier mentally? Can you learn to trust this a little bit more, right? And so, I think that, by adding rule number 3, maybe that makes it a little bit more palatable to players, because we're not saying don't be offensive. But like you said, Josh, we want to know why we want to play high percentage tennis. We want to know why to follow such rules.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, and I think we do want to come up with a plan for different types of situations, right? Where I think those first 2 rules are really important, especially at the baseline. Okay, I'm moving left, I'm moving right. I move right and I want to hit the ball left, right? So for the right-handed player, that's going to be their forehand, hitting that ball cross court. When I move left, hit the ball right, that's most of the time going to be a backhand, but that could also be a forehand, right? If players want to run around it and hit, you know, essentially what that's saying is that we want to hit inside out there, not inside in. Inside in being a tougher, riskier shot. Inside out, you are hitting into a lot more court. You're generally going to be hitting to your opponent's backhand if they're right-handed. If you watch the pros again, you will see that way more often than not that they're hitting that ball cross court rather than trying to pull that ball inside in, which is, first of all, you're going to the opponent's forehand, but second of all, you're hitting into a lot less court. You are already pulled over to the ad side base, the ad side sideline, and then you're trying to aim close to that sideline. You're not hitting into a lot of court. Where inside out, you were hitting into considerably more court, which is a big reason why it's higher percentage. But I think also, as you were saying, having a plan for what you want to do when you're moving forward is really important. And I think a lot of players struggle with this portion of the game in terms of their transition game, in terms of what you do with a short ball, how you approach the net. I think a lot of times players practice their baseline game and they practice their volleys and maybe they practice approach shots, but maybe it's only certain types of approach shots. They don't necessarily build that transition skill in the way that they could. And therefore if you get a short ball, you're ahead of the point. And rather than being able to sort of maintain that advantage in the point, come up to net, finish points at the net in a reliable way, they're losing a lot. I see players losing a lot of points before they even get to the net. When they're ahead in the point, they have the short ball and then they mishandle that short ball. So I think having a clear plan for that, and I think generally, I think there's different things that we could do with the short ball. I think, again, if we're sticking with directionals, oftentimes hitting the ball more down the line rather than cross court in that moment allows for less, for fewer angles. And I know you mentioned, Brian, that at that point you can change direction, which I definitely agree with. But yeah, having a clear plan there, right? So maybe it's okay. When I get that short ball, I want to go down the line, or I want to, at least most of the time. Again, I don't think you have to follow these 100% of the time. I think there's something to be said for being unpredictable in certain ways, for sabotaging your opponents, by changing things up. But I think being able to stick with this the vast majority of the time is going to help everybody. But then what you do with those exceptions, what you do in some of those other moments, is what can differentiate you. And again, as Brian said, most people aren't using these rules. So if you are the one sticking with these rules, you're the one creating those opportunities for yourself in a reliable way. Your opponent will likely get impatient. Your opponent will likely stray from these rules and then give you opportunities. You may hit the ball, if people can visualize this or picture this, you may hit the ball cross court and be in that cross court forehand to forehand rally. And maybe you pull them off the court with a forehand angle. And they are in the doubles alley or they're even off the court and they decide to go down the line. Right? So they're going to go down the line with their forehand there into your backhand, assuming players are right-handed, which 90 or so percent of players are. They go cross court with their forehand. Sorry, they go down the line with their forehand. They're pulled off the court. They're in the doubles alley, even a little bit beyond the doubles alley. They go down the line into your backhand. But then what? Then they're off the court. And then all you have to do is stick with that plan and continue to take that ball cross court with your backhand. And they're all the way off the court in the doubles alley or beyond it. You're going cross court with your backhand into the opposite side of the court, and they're going to have a tough time with that. They likely won't get to that next ball. Maybe they do, but they're going to be in a very defensive position there. So again, by just sticking with this plan, you can really capitalize on them being out of position rather than you trying to almost, outsmart this plan and constantly be thinking, okay, should I go down the line? Should I go cross court? Should I go deep down the middle? Should I loop it? Should I slice it? There's a lot of decisions to be made there, and there can be decision fatigue. You're making so many decisions that the quality of those decisions can go down over time. So instead, can we make fewer decisions? And can we have more of a system where, okay, at the baseline, moving this direction, this is what I do, moving this direction, this is what I do. when I get that short ball and I'm moving forward, this is what I do. Even with volleys, this is what I do with different types of volleys to, again, keep it simple, keep the number of decisions to a minimum. Even on serves, I think as well, right? Second serve, maybe I go to the backhand every time, or I go or body, right? Or whatever it is, or if it's 40 love, this is the type of serve that I hit, or love 40, this is the type of serve that I hit, or deuce point. A lot of times people are playing no ad now on deuce. This is my favorite serve. This is the serve that I go to. So again, by spending that time ahead of time with a sports psychology professional, with a coach, with a parent, with somebody, or thinking that through, really thinking that through, then you're able to really have a plan for all the different situations that will come up in a match and exactly how you want to handle them.
Yeah, and pre-committing to those kinds of things is definitely very, very helpful. I think you could somewhat coherently argue, Josh, that players like Djokovic and Murray, when they go into a point, they're not necessarily thinking about winning the point. They're thinking about playing to their rules and playing them the best that they can, because they have developed a lot of trust in their system of playing. And I think that's really the thing for all of us to learn is, can I develop trust in a specific way of playing that is tailored to my strengths, that allows me to be, consistent, use good directionals to be accurate, right? Not to lose points by making, silly mistakes due to poor decision making, and simply trying, like, after a point's over, don't necessarily be so worried about whether you won or lost the point, but evaluate the point based on, how did I do with my system of playing? What tweaks do I need to make to it? So one thing, if we were to apply this to your game, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you like your backhand a little bit more than your forehand, right? So the idea of moving left might be more just about you hitting great backhands cross court. That might be the one that you attack more on. Maybe you hitting it, with more pace there. And then when you're moving to your right for your forehand, that might just be about high and deep and so forth, right? So that right there, we're kind of adjusting what those directional balls look like based on your game. My game is typically, I like my forehand, and my forehand is better when it's high and heavy. So part of my rules on the forehand are, not only am I playing these directionals, but I'm the trajectory of the ball, I want it a certain way. I typically slice my backhand. So I want the trajectory and spin of that ball a certain way. So I'm tailoring my directionals based on my particular strengths and preferences on that. I also know that those things are what make me more effective. And so when I'm done with a point, obviously I would love to win points, but I want to just sort of evaluate, hey, how did I do with trajectory? How did I do with direction? And go from there. And then what I do is I just trust that if I do this over and over and over again, that it will deliver to me the points I need. And I think that's what you see from a guy like Novak Djokovic, is that he simply plays by his rules of shot making, decision making over and over again. And he has such trust in these rules for him that they're going to deliver for him. And when we think about what happens under pressure and under stress, to me, trust is one of the key components, Josh, is that we stop trusting what we're doing and we go into a place of, I'm not sure what to do. And that's where we maybe go down the line when we shouldn't, because we want the point to be over. Or we hit a drop shot when we're a couple feet behind the baseline and it's not really the place to do it. And we either miss it or we just end up giving the opponent an easy short ball. And so we we learn to trust our particular rules and we simply play that way. And that's what I'm asking people to try out, because I think you'll develop more trust in how you play. You'll be handling pressure better because you have a specific way and you can just follow that. And you'll be thinking less on the court. You'll have less of that mental load. It will feel after the match lighter. You won't feel that like you called it, decision fatigue of what to be doing all the time and over analyzing things and so forth. So I think this is just a great strategy for people to try out and see how it goes at first with the simple rules, and then start layering on some of your own.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, no, and I think it really is a great foundation for players. Rather than having that ball, to the forehand and thinking, okay, what now? No, I have a plan for it. Nope. Okay, I have a backhand, I have a plan for that. I have the short ball, I have a plan for that. And can we stray from that on occasion? Yes. I think at least. But I think it really does create that nice plan and that nice. I think it really gives players, yeah, a lot more confidence and a lot more sureness. They're going to be more sure that this is not that this is going to work every time, because it's not. Not that they're going to make every shot, because they're not. But they know that they are going for a higher percentage shot. They know that they are going for a shot in a playing style that will work more often than not. And I think, when we think about this, it's not going to work every point. It's not going to work every match, but over time, this is the type of playing style that leads to better results, because you're playing the percentages, because you're playing in a way that where you're not beating yourself. If you can keep the ball cross court, if you can stick to some of these really clear rules, if you can, hit the ball down the line and follow that ball into the net down the line more, when you have a short ball, you're really sticking to a lot of the key fundamentals. And rather than thinking, for that 10 and under player, okay, this is what the inside in forehand looks like, or this is what the swinging volley looks like, down the line, and trying to paint the corners and that sort of thing on a shot like a swinging volley, which I think for most players at any level is a tough shot, you know, regardless of a player being 10 and under. I think then you really build that solid foundation, and then you can layer in some of these other things. You can layer in some of those other shots. You can change it up sometimes. You can do some of these other things. But I think I think it's really important that players have a plan. And as you said, especially during big points will come up, deuce points, break points, tiebreakers, all of these will take place. So when your heart is pounding a little bit faster than it normally is, when you might have a lot of thoughts going through your mind, having that clear game plan for what I want to do on this next point, for how I respond to different types of shots, is couldn't be more important. So I think I think at the same time, I think, again, making the comparison to the in-between point routine, sometimes I hear players, we'll go through it, and then I'll often ask them, all right, so how's it going? How often are you using it? And I get a whole range of answers here. And I see you nodding here, Brian, as well. And sometimes I hear players say, I use it as much as I possibly can. I use it almost always. I try it during practice. I do it if I'm up by a lot. If I'm down by a lot, I use it as much as I can. And other times I hear players say, no, I use it when I really need it. And what does that mean? Maybe in a big point. But then I find that those players have a tough time actually really using it when they need it, because they will often forget about it because it hasn't become automatic. It hasn't become ingrained. And I think it's the same thing here, that if we really only go to this skill set when we really quote unquote need it during those big points, if we only go to the system then we're not really ingraining it. So instead, can we use it when we're up by a lot? Can we use it when we're down by a lot? Can we use it during practice? Can we really try to make it automatic and ingrained? And then it's a lot easier to go to that during those big points when it's most necessary, rather than trying to use some sort of system that we haven't fully developed, ingrained, and made automatic.
Yeah, the discipline around this is important. So I think I would make a couple last points that maybe we haven't covered yet for this, which is we have referenced cross court a lot, but let's put it back into the idea of moving right, hitting left, or hitting right. It doesn't mean every ball needs to land in the cross court corner. So if I am on my forehand as a right-hander, I'm in the doubles alley of the deuce side. To hit left is simply at an angle that could end up in the middle. But that's still adhering to the rule. Because the ball went left, it's still crossing the net at a lower point than it would be if I hit down the line. And it's still a longer distance because it is at an angle. So not every ball has to end up in the deuce side corner or the ad side corner based on where you are. Right. So just want to clarify that, because when you watch the pros play, you won't see them hit every ball into those corners. Many balls will end up in the middle, which is another thing, Josh, that I think is bothers me about some coaching is there's this disdain for using the middle of the court. But when you watch pro tennis, there's a lot of balls being played into the middle of the court, right? Now, the other thing that this might sound like is like we're asking you to simply just value consistency and just maybe that sounds passive. And we're not asking you to be passive with these shots. We're still asking you to hit them with pace and spin and confidence. And simply, you're still trying to have these balls do some damage to your opponent to contribute to winning the point. But we're just giving you the high percentage way of doing it. We're not asking to everybody listening to become a pusher through this. Okay. So you're still going to hit with aggression, with confidence to those spots. And I think to help with the rules and really simplify it, Josh, one thing that I have found useful with players is to give them specific short self-talk phrases to be using between points. So, let's apply it to you. You might say, if I were to propose a rule for you, one of your rules might be look to attack with the backhand. Right? You're still going to follow the directional rules, but you might be like kind of hunting backhands as a means of like, all right, that's the shot I'm going to be more aggressive on. For me, I add the high trajectory. Keep the ball high as part of one of my self-talk phrases. I've kind of ingrained the moving piece and where I'm going to hit the ball, but sometimes my trajectory flattens out a little bit. And I need to remind myself of that. So there might be different self-talk phrases that you also use to reduce the amount of thinking you're doing. And they could be unrelated to the system. It could just be like breathe, watch the ball, next point. But that's, again, reducing the amount of analysis and thought process going on. And so I think by simply trying to do this, experimenting, as we've said in many of our episodes, this is all about who you're becoming. There's no threat here to your game by trying this out and experiencing it and seeing how it goes. And you'll be richer for the experience. You'll know. I mean, because a listener could easily be skeptical and say, well, that won't work for me. But do you really know? Why not try it out in a practice match and see what you think? How does it feel after the match? Did I think less? Was it easier? Was it harder? Did it make me overthink things because I'm not used to that? There could be a whole host of questions you could ask yourself after a match. But like what we've talked about many times with tennis, this is all about who you're becoming. So have the experience, value the learning, and see what happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I could see there being a progression here too with it, where maybe you start with this during practice. Maybe you start with it during practice points. Maybe you start with it, try it during a practice point game up to 15 or 21. Use during a practice set, use it during a match, and see how it goes. Again, this doesn't mean, and I could see the objection coming up that an aggressive player might say, well, what, you just expect me to hit the ball cross court all the time. I can't go for my down the line shots. And that's not what we're saying. We're saying that you want to have a system that works for you. And for some players, that system is going to look more aggressive. For some players, it's going to look less aggressive. For some players, they're going to hit the ball more flat. Some players are going to hit the ball with more spin or use, their slice more than topspin. And that's okay. But again, having some sort of system like this, is means that you are going to be playing to your strengths, but also playing the percentages a lot more and hopefully not overthinking so much, but having a clear intention. When we think about flow and what helps players get to flow, it really is that they're not thinking so much all the time. They have a clear plan, a clear intention for what they want to do, a clear goal, and they're just trying to execute on that. And that doesn't mean they're going to execute on that every time, but they have a clear goal for what they're doing. And I think focusing on that goal and creating rules that allow for players to just focus on that goal rather than focusing on everything else make it so much easier to hopefully execute on that goal, but not be thinking so much while they're trying to do that. But instead, just trying to focus on that goal execution and the next point. Okay, I'm trying to do that same thing. I'm trying to keep that ball cross court. I'm trying to hit the ball left when I'm moving right, trying to hit the ball right when I'm moving left, trying to really stick to this plan and seeing how that goes. And I as you said, Brian, I think most players will find that by really trying to stick to that, they will find positive results, but just understanding that that's going to look different for each player, right? If a really aggressive player, Del Potro, a Sabalenka, uses something like this, or a Gilles Simon uses something like this, it's going to look different, and that's okay, right? And it's going to look different for two players at the 3.5 level or two 14-year-olds, and that's okay too. But I think just having a clear system, clear plan like this is going to help. It's going to help everybody.
For sure. And I think, the overall result is that you'll probably beat yourself less. And that's a lot of tennis matches are lost, not won by the opponent. And if you lose a match, I would prefer that you come off the court and say, well, I didn't really lose it. The opponent beat me. And for the most part, that doesn't happen. But when you have a rules-based system for how you play, you get closer and closer to that kind of thing. So we'd love to hear how you experience this if you give it a shot on the court. And, Josh, thanks for indulging me on this topic. I do think there's a lot of value in this type of thinking, whether it's tennis or other aspects of life, and having rules and helping you to create more discipline. So again, thank you. And thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions, especially on this topic, please email us at tennisIQpodcast@gmail.com. Also, please rate and review the podcast so others can find it. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. Also, please check us out on Instagram. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.